Welcome to our Fall Convocation series with the theme, Living into Hope. For today's convocation, we're pleased to have as our speaker Professor Michael Genovese of the Political Science Department at Loyola Marymount University, where he holds the Loyola Chair of Leadership Studies. To begin our program, read along with me passages from the Gospel of Luke in which the disciples are in dispute about which of them is the greatest. That's Luke 22, verses 24 through 27. A dispute also arose among them as to which one of them was to be regarded as the greatest. But he said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. Rather, the greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one at the table? But I am among you as one who serves." May we pray together. As we approach our national election to consider those who would be leaders at each level of our civil society, we pray for those who would take on the mantle of leadership and face the personal challenges of service to all in their jurisdiction. We pray for wisdom, strength, and God's grace to bind up our national wounds from the affliction of COVID-19 and from contentious disputes in our body politic. Remind us, O God, of the goodness of those who serve us well on every level in our society. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Whenever I consider the importance of good leadership, I'm reminded of the wise words of George Webby, a beloved friend and one who served well as ruling elder in our church. He cautioned us always to remember the fish rots from the head down. We thank each of you for joining our virtual convocations this afternoon and invite your warm welcome to Professor Michael Genovese. Michael Genovese is Professor of Political Science, Director of the Institute for Leadership Studies, and President of the Global Policy Institute. In 2006, he was made a Fellow at the Queen's College, Oxford University. In 2017, Professor Genovese was awarded the American Political Science Association's Distinguished Teaching Award, only the 5th time in the APSA's history that the award has been given. Professor Genovese has written 50 books, including How Trump Governs, The Trumping of American Politics, and Leadership Matters with Thomas Cronin. And that book was named Outstanding Leadership Book of the Year by the International Leadership Association. Other titles include Women as Political Leaders, edited with Janie Steckenrider, Building Tomorrow's Leader Today, and The Future of Leadership, Leveraged Leadership as in an age of hyper change. Michael Genovese has won over a dozen university and national teaching awards and frequently appears as a commentator on local national and international television and radio. I saw him interviewed this summer on CNN Australia. Professor Genovese has been the Washington Center's Scholar in Residence at 3 Democratic National Political Conventions and the 2008 presidential inauguration, and served as Scholar in Residence at the 2012 Republican National Convention. During the presidency of George H.W. Bush, Michael served as a consultant on crisis management at the Department of Defense. Lest you get the impression he's all work and no play, Michael has written a cookbook, and he occasionally does stand-up comedy at the Hollywood Improv Comedy Club. Michael is eminently qualified to speak to us on the subject of leadership, and we appreciate your time with us today, Michael.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for those kind words. I'd like to relinquish the rest of my time to Barbara to continue saying nice things about me, if I may.
Well, I could go on.
First of all, let me just say, apologize, because if I'm not 100% on my game today, it's because I had an odd thing. I was awakened in the middle of the night with my wife screaming. She was in the other room, and I ran in, and she had something on the TV, and she's going, "Run, run, get out while you can, get out, run." She was watching our wedding video, and no, of course she wasn't. As a presidency scholar, people always ask me, who's going to win the next election? And it's just around the corner now. And as a political scientist, there are all kinds of models that they use, very scientific and statistical. And the odd thing is there is one fairly non-scientific model that is the absolute best predictor. And it's been used since the time of Franklin Roosevelt, and it is the best predictor of who will win the presidency every single year. And right now we're at the very 11th hour of our campaign. And here's the indicator. It's going to sound odd. It's who has the best-selling bumper sticker in Washington, D.C. And they actually measure these things, which is the best-selling bumper sticker in Washington, D.C. And I will give you a sneak preview. This year's biggest seller is a bumper sticker that says, "Run, Joe, run." The weird thing is it's bought by a lot of Republicans who put it on the front of their car. And so I'm not sure what that part means, but anyway, it's an old joke. Let me say a word about Jim and Barbara Matthew before I begin, because I've known them for, since 1980, I've known Jim, and very shortly after that met Barbara. They are the sweetest people I've ever met. And when I grow up, I want to be just like Jim. My wife and I got to know them. We went to Oxford University for a summer program together. And my wife gave me permission. She says, "Yes, you can be in love with Barbara." And so I confess that I am. And Jim is the most genuine, nicest person you could imagine. A very quick Jim Matthews story. When I first got to LMU and they would have trustee meetings, there would be a lone person standing in front of the entrance to the meeting with a sign that said, "Stop investing in South Africa." That was from 1980 on, and that was Jim Matthew. He actually lived his values, and seeing him there became kind of the expectation for everyone. He was there all alone, but he was there every meeting, never missed one, and history has proven Jim to have been correct. And so when Barbara asked me to speak with you, I didn't even have to think about it. Of course, the answer is yes, because they are two of the nicest people I've ever known. I actually am a neighbor of yours. I come from Pasadena. When I was 13 years old, my parents moved to Pasadena. I went to St. Philip's grade school. I went to LaSalle High School. I know where you folks are. It was a wonderful place in which to grow up. My wife is also from the area, from San Marino. So I feel very much at home with a group like this. I'm told that I need to have some Q&A at the end, so I will have reserve some time for questions and answers, but there's a great story about that. It seems that there was a physicist at Harvard who invented some new branch of physics that was revolutionary. This was in the 1950s. And the dean of his college called him in and said, "Professor, this is revolutionary. We want you to go around the country and talk about this, not just because it's important for physics, but it's great for our university and for fundraising. So we want you to go all over the country talking about this incredible new branch of physics that you invented." And the guy goes, "Well, Dean, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid to fly. I just don't trust these prop planes. The dean says, that's okay. I already anticipated that. I know what your problem is. I'm going to get you a chauffeur, your own chauffeur, and he'll just drive you around. The guy said, okay. And he started on this tour of different colleges around the country. And after about 8 or 9 of his presentations, the chauffeur driving him to the next destination said, you know, Professor, your speech is brilliant. And you're so clear in your explanation, but you know, I've heard it so many times, I bet I could give it exactly the way you give it, even with the hesitations, even with the rising and lowering of your voice. And the professor goes, okay, wise guy, go ahead and do it tonight. And in fact, the chauffeur does it. He gives the entire speech, 55 minutes, exactly the way the professor did. When it came time for question and answers, there was this wise guy graduate student in the front row who says, excuse me, professor, but isn't your theory negated by the famous Smith-Parnell theory? And the chauffeur goes, that is beyond question the stupidest question I've ever heard. It is so stupid, I'm going to have my chauffeur answer it. And so I will be able to answer your questions. I may have my chauffeur answer. Now for my classes, I always start class with trivia, with political trivia. And I want to see how smart you are. Barbara tells me that you are a very bright group. So I'm going to give you some trivia questions. You can just shout out the answer if you want. Presidential trivia. Who was the tallest president ever? Lincoln, of course. Who is the shortest president ever? Madison. Who is the youngest person ever to become president? You're all saying Kennedy, aren't you? It was not Kennedy. He was the youngest ever elected. The youngest president ever was Teddy Roosevelt, who was vice president and became president when McKinley died. Who was the first divorced president? You may remember, Ronald Reagan. Who's the only president to earn a PhD? Woodrow Wilson. Who's the only president to coach a college football team? Also Woodrow Wilson. Both the answer Princeton. Here's a tricky one. What president was born a king? What president was born a king? The answer to that is that Gerald Ford was born Leslie King. His mother divorced the father when he was a baby. He was adopted and he took on the name of his new father. So Leslie King became Gerald Ford. Who's the only bachelor president? James Buchanan. This is a tough one, so put on your thinking caps. Which presidents are not buried on US soil? I'm going to give you a second for that because it's a tough one. Which presidents are not buried on US soil? Obama, Clinton, George W. Bush, Jimmy, all the ones that are alive are not buried on US soil. That was so easy. I didn't get that one myself. Last trivia question. For all the marbles and for the giant cash reward, how many miles of wall have been built along the Mexican border during the Trump presidency? 9. About 31 more miles or so were repaired, but only 9 miles of new wall. All right, let's just start I have a PowerPoint and I'll ask Lindsay to start it because I want to talk about 2020 and a presidential election year. And I also want to talk about how that year has shaped what went on in the campaign and what went on in the country. 2020 has been an incredible year, and I don't say that with any affection. It was, what have we done to deserve this? So let's go back to January 2020. And if you, next slide, please. Now, when we started in January, we had a whole slew of Democratic wannabes, people who wanted to run for president. And it was actually a pretty good field. I mean, quite often you get 3 or 4, but here you got about at least half a dozen people who really were presidential timber. And they all were after a job. Debbie says she wants to skip to 2022. I just want to get to 2021. These were all, several of these were people who were of presidential timber, but they were all tilting at windmills. And they probably knew it. Because in January of 2020, Donald Trump was riding high. The economy was going fairly well. We weren't in any wars, and the Democrats were at each other's throats. Trump had been getting Supreme Court justices and federal judges approved. He had taken command, and it was a hostile takeover of the Republican Party, but he took over full command. He would hold his rallies where he would keep his audience enthralled for 2 hours. He was a phenomenon. How did he get elected in the first place? It was just an incredible thing for him to have gotten elected. And so in January, it looked like all of these people were running so that they could lose. Next slide, please. One of the debates in the Democratic Party was held at my university, at Loyola Marymount University, and it was an incredible thing to behold. It was one of the most fun events we've ever had. It ran beautifully. And it was a great event to hold, helped our university in its sort of recognition across the United States, certainly. And even globally, people would email me and say, hey, I just saw your university. Got to meet several of the candidates. And the best part of it is after the debates, they go into, in this case, it was a gymnasium, and they all start meeting with the press to try to help them to spin the argument of who won the debate in their favor. And you get to meet everyone. So it was a wonderful event, and things went so beautifully. Next slide, please. And you could see that there were pockets of support for different people. No one at first seemed to capture the kind of romance of the party or the process. Next one, please. Biden had an early lead, but Sanders and Warren, who both appealed to the same constituency, were right behind. And if you combine their two numbers, they're right there with Biden. And then Pete Buttigieg came out of nowhere and got a lot of attention. Mike Bloomberg bought his way into the process and got out quickly. And there were a number of other candidates who were pretenders to the throne. Next slide, please. So from 2016 to 2020, you can see some of the differences and where people were getting support. Biden and Clinton tended to be more popular in more conservative regions among Democratic voters. Next slide. But Biden emerged fairly quickly, and one by one, his rivals just dropped out. That was partly a function of their commitment to beating Donald Trump or putting up the best fight against Donald Trump. But at that point, still, not that many people thought a Democrat could unseat Donald Trump. He was actually, while he was not terribly popular, his popularity never got to 50%. He still had on his side one of the most important things that you could have, and that is the answer to the question, are you happy with the way things are going, with the direction America is going in? That answer has been important in understanding who wins and loses races. And in January, people were, not too, they were not too pleased, but they were not unhappy. So it looks bad for the Democrats. Next slide, please. And then kaboom. COVID-19 hit. The president responded to it badly, tried to discount it, tried to underplay it. told us it would be over soon, told us not to worry, and did not take the steps necessary to try to help solve the dilemma. So COVID-19 was of enormous consequence. And what it did was it opened the door for the Democrats. Added to that was the economic meltdown that followed the COVID-19 crisis. The economy went into freefall. It was pretty much shut down. People were out of work. They were worried about whether they could pay their bills. Could they pay their rent? There were all kinds of people who were anxious, scared, and worried. The government had a stimulus bill that helped a little bit, but that ended, and now we're back to, what are we going to do? Can we pay the rent? So COVID-19, the economic meltdown, and then the Black Lives Matter situation came to center stage, where they had several killings of African-American men and some women, and the government response was tepid. All of those things occurred. Next slide, please. And the next one. All of those occurred in the context of, and those are old numbers, of a rising caseload, rising deaths, 50,000, 100,000, 150, 200,000, 250. We're about at 250 now. And there's poor Ben Franklin with his mask on. And that kind of was the dilemma we were facing. Next, please. Next slide. It was a roller coaster, and it had a tremendous impact. Next slide, please. No job, no rent. People were hurting, and the hurt was widespread. I saw it with my students. We shut down the university, went online, and trust me, teaching is not nearly as much fun for me online, and it's not as efficacious for them online. It's necessary right now, but you do what you can, make the best of what you can, but nobody's happy. Next slide, please. Unemployment's up. Things look terrible. And so I'm going to nominate 2020 for the Worst Year Ever Award. It probably isn't, but it sure seems like it. All of this, next slide, please. All of this fell on the shoulders, the COVID crisis, the economic crisis, the Black Lives crisis of the incumbent president. Fair or not, we praise or blame presidents for things that go on. Presidents get too much credit when things go well and too much credit when things go badly. Next slide, please. There were riots. Those riots led to violence, looting. Then there was the famous Donald Trump, Washington, D.C., where he used the military to pave a path for him to go in front of the church across from the White House, hold up a Bible upside down, and claim that he was going to solve everything. He didn't. And people judge presidents by results. He did not get the results. This is now the third wave of the pandemic hitting us now. Next slide, please. Oh, that's me. What a handsome young man. Next, please. And all of this fell on the shoulders of Donald Trump. This is, one of the lines I use to try to explain the dilemma and the problem we were in is that this is what happens when you treat the presidency of the United States as an entry-level job. Donald Trump is the first president in our history with zero military and zero political experience. He had a lot of experience in business, but it was a family business, and he ran it like a dictator. Government's not like that. Congress doesn't take its orders from the chief executive, from the president. And so you had that lack of political background and experience, plus he had all those character questions that we're well aware of now. And he had that slash and burn style of politics that his base absolutely loved. They loved it when he got angry. Most Americans didn't. And so Donald Trump probably was the wrong person to deal with a crisis such as the COVID crisis. But in America, that's who you've got. Donald Trump is accustomed to living life at breakneck speed. His normal speed limit is 185 miles an hour, 24/7. He's nonstop, he's frenetic. He goes 185 miles an hour, 24/7, even around hairpin turns. And so we've been on kind of a Mr. Toad's ride. He loves to be the center of attention, demands to be the center of attention. And it reminds me of Theodore Roosevelt's daughter was asked about her father, who was in a way like Trump in terms of being demanding public attention. She said of her father, "Poor daddy's like the bride at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral, and the baby at every christening." That's kind of Trump. He had to be the center of our attention, and he made himself the center of attention. But some of us, many of us, are starting to suffer from Trump fatigue. Sort of that his overgrown childishness behavior didn't sit well, didn't sell well. And so that confrontational approach that worked for Donald Trump early started to backfire. Now, I will say Donald Trump tapped into some very real and very appropriate grievances that people had. Donald Trump didn't create the conflictual society, the hyper-partisanship that we're in. It existed before him. He exploited that. He used that as a ramming rod to move ahead, to get attention, and to get public support. But he didn't create the circumstances. He was kind of like the guy who was an accelerant. The fire was already lit. He just provided the accelerant that made it much worse, much bigger. But he was tapping into some very real grievances that people had, and some very not so positive grievances and complaints. Part of the problem was the world was changing. Our country was changing. It's not the 1950s anymore. We are a much more diverse society. Women are much more prominent than they were, say, in 1950, 60. And so women and minorities are demanding a place at the table. That has created a backlash. The white male status anxiety is what it's usually referred to as. People who were on top of the heap, now others are trying to get on top and are making advances, and a number of people didn't like it. That was accelerated, that kind of fear and the kind of gnawing that occurred in a lot of people when you had an African American as president for 8 years, and then it looked like a woman was going to be president. And so Donald Trump rose in that atmosphere and tapped into it, and did so with an incredible skill. He is a magnificent salesman. He read the audience. He knew what the customer was looking for, and he gave them that. And he did an incredible job and won. But he couldn't govern. So he didn't create the toxic and poison atmosphere, but he was the accelerant. He was the gas on the fire to that hyperpartisanship that we see. If you have any doubts, and I know you don't, but I want to give you one statistic on how things are so different today than they were years ago. From 1960 to 1980, people would be asked in a poll, would you object if your child married someone of the opposite party? So between 1960 and 1980, when people were asked that, would you object to your daughter marrying, or your child marrying someone of the opposite party? Only 16% of Republicans said yes, and only 14% of Democrats said yes. Today, when you ask the same question, 80% of Republicans say yes, they would object, and 78% of Democrats say they would object. I mean, that's a striking difference. If you ask people today, is the other party evil or dangerous? 68% of Republicans say they are evil and dangerous. 64% of Democrats. And so we live in a really toxic political world. Historian Henry Adams defined politics as the systematic organization of hatreds. I always was struck by that and thought, that can't be right. Political scientists have a term for it. We call it negative partisanship. Sadly, it's kind of where we are. A negative partisanship is where we are today. And so from January, when Donald Trump was riding high, to March, April, May, things turned around. Trump was unable to satisfy the public by solving, or at least dealing constructively with the COVID crisis. Next slide, please. And then we had the two parties arriving at their nominee. The Democratic Party's convention was strange. It was a pandemic convention. It was done virtually. The Democratic Party, next slide, please. You can see people wearing masks, and it's just such a different atmosphere. Lurking in the background, and if you'll next slide, and just go out through the next three quickly. Lurking in the background were the foreign policy crises. There's the Republican convention done virtually. Again, an odd situation. Next, please. You had Russia was meddling with our convention in our affairs. We had Kim Jong-un, who was developing nuclear weapons. You had the Chinese, who were engaged in the behaviors that you see. Next slide, please. In the midst of this was all these protests. Next, please. And then came the book by Donald Trump's niece, which revealed all kinds of inside family stories. And it came at a time when Donald Trump was vulnerable. I would not advise you to read the book. The book is really not well done, but it had an impact. Next, please. And then his sister came up with the quote that you see there, Mary Trump. All of this is playing into the criticisms of Donald Trump. Next, please. And then something that was just devastating happened. RBG passed away. Next, please. She was a phenomenon. What a character, what a role model. And next, please. And then when she passed away, something really happened to us. It was a shock to the system. Then we had the two debates. The first debate was held, and it was a barn burner. It was just unbelievable. You had Donald Trump in full hostile mode, interrupting, raising his voice, snarky. It damaged him tremendously. Donald Trump was told by his handlers, you're losing women, you're losing seniors, and you're losing young voters. First of all, you've got to win back women. Instead, it backfired on him. And so he really put himself in a hole. Then they canceled the second debate, and then they had the third one, which was underwhelming. Both Biden and Trump did a little bit better than they did in the first, but quite underwhelming. Next, please. And then Donald Trump tested positive. I can't imagine a worse thing happening to a president who's doesn't have much of a policy on on coronavirus, and then getting it. He recovered, thankfully, and recovered fairly quickly. Next slide, please. But it reminded us of just what happened. Then you had the vice presidential debate, which was kind of a sleeper, except for the next slide. The most talked about event at the second of the vice presidential debate a fly landing on the vice president's head and staying there. Next, please. So what's next? We have less than a week. We're going to have a presidential election. I did the math Sunday night. There are 7 states that are in play where the president or Biden has a 1.5% lead or less. 3 states favor Biden, 3 states favor Trump, 4 for Biden. If Trump wins all 7, he still doesn't have enough to get over the 270 electoral college mark. And so the key is going to be Pennsylvania. I'm going to give you the secret to going to bed early election night. Watch 3 states. Florida, Biden is 1 or 2 points ahead. North Carolina, toss up. Pennsylvania, Biden is about 4%, 5% ahead. So what's next is the question. There seem to be very few pathways for Donald Trump to win re-election. He really has to sweep the table. And people say, well, what about 2016? You folks said the same thing. We did. The polling in 2016 was actually not as bad as some people think. They predicted that Hillary would win around 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. She won 2.9 million more. The problem with the polling is they didn't get it state by state. It was the national polling. And so this time around, they're much more sensitive to that because they thought, gee, you know, last time, in the last week, Trump kept on closing the gap. And so a week out, she was ahead by 4 points, 5 points. A couple of days later, 4, 3, 2. And so Donald Trump ran an incredible campaign and shocked everyone. Does lightning strike twice? The answer is actually in the natural world, lightning does strike twice. In fact, it strikes twice a lot. But does it in the political world? I think the chances of that happening again are slim. And I say that because, number one, we were surprised and shocked by Trump. He came out of nowhere and grabbed the presidency. I don't think that that's going to happen again because people are ready for it. 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton started to believe her own press clippings and started to campaign in areas where she was going to clearly not win, hoping that she could get, win a couple of red states over. Instead of going to the Midwest where she should have gone, Donald Trump did the right thing. His campaign, he had a campaign guru, Pascal, who said, I know the numbers. You go to the Midwest Rust Belt and you can win. You can turn 2 or 3 of those states. That's the guy that Trump fired about 8 weeks ago. You never fire the smartest guy in the organization unless you have to. He fired the smartest guy on his team. And he fired them because he went, that was after the Tulsa rally that he had, one of the first rallies he had, and it absolutely backfired. People got COVID. It was just a terrible, and he blamed it on not himself, which is his fault. He's the one who insisted on it. He blamed it on one of the staffers, the wrong one. And so I don't think Trump has the edge. He's not going to sneak up on anyone. He's not going to surprise anyone. The Democrats pretty much are looking out for all the things that might happen. For example, the Democrats have lawyers, teams of lawyers in every single state who are ready if the Trump folks dispute the outcome of a state. And it looks like they may very well, so it could be a little crazy. So what's going to happen? My prediction is Joe Biden will win the popular vote by more than Hillary Clinton. I'm guessing 4 million instead of 2.9 million. The Electoral College is a different can of worms. The Electoral College, Hillary won 2.9 million more votes than Trump and lost the Electoral College. It favors smaller states. It favors more rural and more conservative states. But not by that much, but by enough. So I think Biden will win by 4 million plus votes. And he'll also, from my calculations, I did the math Sunday, He'll also probably win about 312 to 316 in that ballpark electoral college votes. You need 270 to win. What will then happen? That's the $64,000 question. Will Donald Trump be a good loser? In the past 4 years, has he been? No, he's the kid in class who won't shut up. He's the kid in class that I actually had to do this. I had to revise my syllabus. He's the kid you have to revise your syllabus for because they keep on talking in class and misbehaving, and you just have to put in, I will penalize you for misbehaving. Donald Trump is that kid. You saw it in the first debate when he just kept on interrupting and talking over Biden, and that's who he is. It's his personality. That's part of what made him a successful business person, perhaps, a TV personality, perhaps, but it's interfered with his ability to govern a nation. And so what I expect he'll do is, unless it is really a clear victory, I think if there's any chance, he will try to dispute the results of certain states, claim that the late vote counts are illegitimate. And there's a phenomenon, I'm almost done here, so there's a phenomenon called the red mirage and the blue shift. The red mirage is going to be on election night. People who vote by going to the polls, a lot of Republicans are going to do that, will give you a picture of Donald Trump doing pretty well. Trump knows this, and he's already said, by election night, we're going to call it. I'm not going to wait for those other votes. Election night is when we're going to decide it. He may very well either be ahead or very, very close to Biden on election night. The problem with that, of course, is that this is a COVID election and millions of people are voting absentee mail-in. Over 1/3, well over 1/3 of all the votes that occurred in 2016, same number have occurred already by mail-in. Those will take time because different states will have different rules. It's crazy. We have 50 states plus the District of Columbia all have different rules about how you vote and how you count them and when you can count. Some say you can start counting election day. Some say you have to wait until after it. So what's going to happen is the red mirage will look like Trump is ahead, and he'll claim that he's ahead. And I'm interested to see if Fox News declares him the winner. But with each passing day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Biden will pick up votes. In the interim, the President of the United States has a very compliant Attorney General, and there are several states that are controlled by Republicans. And the question is, what will they do? I don't see Donald Trump giving in without a fight. And so the horrible question that I'll ask, and then I'll try not to answer it too clearly, is, could there be violence? A lot of Trump's people in a lot of states, you already saw in Michigan where they were going to kidnap the governor, which Trump has made actual jokes about. You have people who are angry. The president is telling them, look, if we lose, it's because it was rigged, it was fixed, it was a fraud. You have people who are going to believe him. What will they do? I don't know the answer to that. This is the first time in my life I've ever actually worried that in my country, we would not have necessarily a peaceful transfer of power. I just took it for granted. I said, no, we're way more advanced than that. We're not a tin horn dictatorship. We're not a banana republic. We're the United States of America. It doesn't happen here. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm hoping it doesn't happen. But there's certainly the first time in my life where it's the possibility that it could happen. And that's frightening. And so, last slide, please. So what will it be? Rainbows and unicorns? Maybe things will work out beautifully. Maybe we'll have nothing but, happiness and joy. or a fireball of destruction. Okay, that's a little bit too dramatic, but let me conclude my remarks, then I'll open for questions, by referring you to two great thinkers in American history who I think anticipated the kind of issue we're talking about now. The first is the American philosopher and filmmaker Woody Allen, who once said, "There are two roads before us. One leads to death and destruction, the other to annihilation and despair. Let us hope that we have the wisdom to choose the right path." Okay, that's the cynical one. The other quote that I would give you is from the great American political philosopher Betty Davis, who once said, "Hang on, boys, we're in for a bumpy ride." I think we're going to be in for a bumpy ride. I think we'll be okay. I think we'll come out of it, the other end of it, doing pretty well. But I've been wrong before. Anyway, thank you so much for your kind attention. I appreciate. I'm very happy now to answer any questions you have. I've left some time for questions. So please, I think, are we going through Lindsay or Barbara for questions?
I'm happy to field them. We have a couple in the chat box already. And I'm going to go ahead and give the audience this time the ability to unmute themselves. So if you have a question, go ahead and turn on your microphone and please your camera. We'd love to see you as you speak. Or you can also use the chat function.
And please don't try to be overly polite. Ask me as tough a question as you want. I'm happy to try to not answer any questions.
All right, here's one. Even if he does lose, even with a clear victory, I think we are naive to think Trump will just go away. I think he will continue to stir up his followers and resulting violence, continuing to divide our country. Is there any path to the news denying him a platform or at least not allowing him to dominate the airways?
Well, you know, the only people who would respond, who might respond positively to that would be Fox as a national news organization and the Sinclair chain, which is in a lot of the conservative areas. Everyone else, I think, would see it for what it is. But I think the one thing that leads, I know he'll raise a stink, but the one thing that I think leads me to be hopeful about that, if it does come to something like that, is that 4 years ago when Donald Trump ran, he, as were all of his staff on the campaign, was convinced he would lose. And the word was that he was doing that to solidify an audience, what we now call the base. And he was going to start his own Fox-like news network, Trump TV. I think that's what he's going to do. I think he's got plans for that. He'll make a conversion over to, you know, a Trump-like television, Fox-like Trump television. And I think he'll then run in 2024.
Very interesting. Next question. Should Biden win, what do you imagine will become of the Trumplican party?
He did a hostile takeover of the party, and I'm going to give him credit. It was a masterful job. I mean, who does that? I mean, it was incredible. He used fear. He basically threatened people in the party. If you take me on, I will primary you. That is to say, I will find one of my base, turn against you in the primary. We'll probably defeat you, and even if we don't defeat you in the primary, we will weaken you so much that you will lose. And that was enough for the Republicans to cave in. And so, you know, there is no Republican Party. It's the party of Trump. It is a cult of personality more than party. Will that wither away? It won't wither away, no. And there's going to be a lot of Trumpers left. They form a significant part of the Republican Party. So the party has to do something with them. What do you do? A lot depends on whether Trump tries to form a third party, which I don't see him doing, but it's possible, or whether or not the post-Trump party sort of says, okay, we had our I don't know, fun, we had our drift off into Trump land. We need to take back, the grown-ups need to take the party back again. We need to get back to the things we believe in, fiscal responsibility, you know, pro-business policies, a firm stance on foreign policy, developing our alliances again. There are a lot of Republicans, mostly the national security Republicans, who really are going to try to do that. They're going to try to reclaim the party for traditional Republicanism. Has that ship already sailed? I don't know. But the Republicans are going to have a lot of soul searching. Things may get worse before they get better. And you could see the development of a third Trump party.
Next question for Michael. Is there any hope for electoral college reform?
You know, we saw after 2000 where Al Gore won the popular vote, the Supreme Court gave to George W. Bush the presidency. We saw a lot of people talking about that. And we've had that throughout our history in past times when you've had elections where the candidate who won the most votes didn't win the presidency. Two things. Number one, it's very hard to change the Constitution. Two, the kind of anger or the concern seems to fade pretty quickly and other issues then take center stage. So what would we do if we wanted to do something? There are two things we could do. One, if you're so intent on keeping the Electoral College, we could keep it. But instead of giving out electoral votes on a winner-take-all basis, give them out proportionally. And so, for example, Joe Biden is going to win California by 60% plus. All of our delegates will go to Biden. In a neighboring state, let's say Arizona, Joe Biden wins by 22 votes. All of Arizona's votes go to Joe Biden. So you basically wipe people off the face of the earth politically. A fairer system would be to say, let's just do it proportionally. That would also be a much closer match to having democracy, to having the people's vote actually matter. The other way to do it is to eliminate the Electoral College and choose the president by popular vote. A lot of people are reluctant to do that because they believe that the Electoral College helps small states. It does. That it helps the two political parties maintain their position. It does. But I'm not sure that we should be in the business of propping up political parties. And so for me, my preference would be to have a national popular vote, but I'd be very happy with proportional votes for each state.
Yeah, I agree.
Do we have any spoken questions? Anyone want to unmute themselves and jump in? All right, we have some more in the chat. Let's see. The president nominated Barrett, anticipating that he would need SCOTUS to give him the win. How do you see that playing out?
The chances of it getting to the Supreme Court are not high, but it's a possibility. It happened in 2000. Donald Trump took great pride in getting justices nominated to the federal and to the Supreme Court. And again, I'm going to give him tremendous credit. They did a great job doing it. One of my problems with doing that was that, you know, when Merrick Garland was put up with 11 months of Obama's presidency left, they wouldn't even give him a hearing. Now with 3 months, they give Amy Coney Bryant not only a hearing, but a positive vote. That's politics, and it's based on whose ox is being gored. Will she make a difference? She will certainly be a Trump supporter, and the majority of the court now is 6-3, a very solid Republican majority. My guess is if it gets to the Supreme Court and they have to choose, it'll be a 5-4 vote. Donald Trump would win it. And so which of the 6 Republicans would turn? I think it would be Chief Justice Roberts. Chief Justice Roberts, I am told by people who know him, is very concerned that his court, and it's going to be the Roberts court forever, is being perceived as being overly politicized, overly conservative, overly Republican, that it has become a very partisan court. He dreads that. That's one of the reasons why he voted, I am told, to support maintaining the ACA, Obamacare. He was the deciding vote. He doesn't want to push the court too far, too fast to the right. He is a conservative. He wants conservative judicial principles to be at the forefront, but he doesn't want it to be so obvious, so blatant, and so extreme that people lose faith in the courts. The courts don't have what they call the sword. They can't enforce their decisions. They rely for their prestige and power on the public perceiving them to be legitimate and balanced and fair. If they are perceived as being overly political, they lose that status and they lose their influence. Courts historically, not just this court, historically have been very concerned with that. And that's why, for example, in the 1930s, when the Republican-controlled Supreme Court started striking down FDR's New Deal legislation, and he threatened to pack the court, which we failed to do, but the court responded. They saw how vulnerable they were. They were reminded how vulnerable they were, and they started to give FDR a win here and there. I think that's where Roberts is. He doesn't want people to say, oh yeah, you're the Republican Chief Justice.
Great. Again, inviting any spoken questions. Go ahead and jump in if you'd like.
I'd like to ask one. Sir, do you have any hope in something of the near future for our parties to improve their capacity to compromise and to cut down on the hyperpartisanship?
In the short run, no. In the long run, yes. Joe Biden is, I know him to be sincere in his efforts to reach across party lines. He's done it most of his career. He's known for that. Saturday Night Live used to joke when they did the Biden impersonator about how much he loved John McCain. Well, he did. I mean, they were close friends. And he's friends with a lot of Republicans. He's one of the few people who was in the Senate, and then even as vice president, who would do that, who would work the other side of the aisle. He will make an effort to, I have no doubt about it. Will he be rebuffed? Probably. But the pendulum will swing back. Let me give you an example of just how egregious this can be. When Obama was president, he made a few efforts. It didn't last long because he was slapped down. But he made a few efforts to try to reach out to the Republicans. And there was one example that I'll give you that is just so striking. When the movie Lincoln came out, what presidents in the White House, they have their own screening room. They have a little movie theater, and they get movies before they're released. And Spielberg, the White House contacted Spielberg and said, hey, can we have you come over and we can bring Lincoln and will you show it to us before it's released? And so Obama got the idea. He said, this is a perfect opportunity. I'm going to invite all the Republican leadership to bring their family and their kids and all watch Lincoln together. And so he contacted John Boehner, who was then the leader in the House of Representatives. He was the Republican leader, the speaker. And he says, John, I think we can do this. This will be great. I want to invite all the leadership, come on over with your wives and your children, and we're going to watch Lincoln together. And Boehner, who actually wanted to do that as well, his caucus was what the trouble was. But Boehner said, oh, gee, Mr. President, that's terrific. Yeah, that's going to be great. We'll do it. And he called back 2 days later and said, Mr. President, I'm sorry. I brought the idea to my caucus, and they threatened to remove me from the speakership if I did this. Now, who does that? The answer is partisans. Democrats are just as bad. I don't want to make it sound like, this is all these evil Republicans. Both sides do this. But that Lincoln story just gives you a flavor of what's wrong. You can't even sit down and watch a movie together. Part of it is that members of Congress fly in to DC on Sunday night from their home states or districts, and then leave Thursday night. They don't stay in the district. They only work a couple of days a week. They don't stay in DC. They only work a few days a week. They don't socialize together the way they used to. Their kids don't go to the same schools because the families don't move to DC. They stay in Montana, California, New Mexico. And so what you need to do is find bridge building activities. The Obama effort with the movie Lincoln was one such effort, but you got to keep trying to do that. I know Biden will do that. I suspect he will be slapped down a few times. I don't think he'll give up. And maybe it'll work. I'm not optimistic in the short run, but in the long run, the pendulum will swing back. We'll get so sick of it that we'll start saying, I will not vote for anyone who does this. And at that point, they'll stop doing it.
Great, thank you. We have 3 or 4 more in the chat. Any other spoken questions? Okay, next one in the chat. What do you think, Michael, what do you think law enforcement will do if Biden wins? Will they support the right wing or will they support democracy?
The military leaders have already been asked that question.
Back to the White House.
And they have answered universally, we will not get involved. That was sort of disappointing to me because I would have thought they would stand up for the Constitution and whoever rightly was elected. But anyway, the Secret Service, on January 20th at noon, Donald Trump is no longer president unless he wins and takes the oath of office. At that point, if he tries to stay on, the Secret Service would, I think, try to escort him out of the office. If there's trouble, the DC police and the Capitol Hill police could get involved. In the long run, Donald Trump could not pull that off unless there's an actual revolution, which there's not going to be. And so he could really make things ugly, but it wouldn't work. At some point, he's going to have to give in if he loses, I think.
She's going to ask you.
Okay, great. Gorman, did you have a question?
Yes. I'm wondering if under Biden, the arts, intellectual events with lectures, readings of literature, poetry, recitals, if all that will come back to the White House. Will the White House also have, in a sense, social fun again?
Bless you for asking that. The White House used to be a place, that and the Kennedy Center, where the American arts were honored and flourished. All presidents, Democratic and Republican, would attend events there, promote culture. This is the first president since World War II, since before World War II, who does not. Because he has kind of lowbrow taste. And I don't mean to be rude about that. He doesn't like opera. He doesn't like plays. Classical music he says, is beyond him. He said that. Well, if you don't have it, at least fake it. Because the arts are what separate us, make us civilized, make us better, bring us to a higher plane. I can say this to this group, bring us closer to God. Because in those magnificent words or lyrics, songs, there's something transcendental, something transforming that happens, transformative in the sense that it puts us in touch with higher values. Donald Trump is a purely transactional person. He's what you would call a day trader. We need presidents, and I remember, I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. In fact, behind me, you can't really see it, but there's a votive candle with Bob Dylan on it. Obama had Bob Dylan at the White House, and I thought, all is right with the world. He had gospel music, he had opera, he had, not just Obama, Kennedy, Reagan, George W. and H.W. Bush, the Clintons. They bring America's best to the White House. It's easy to get back to that, and we will, and that's the good news. Closer to God we will be again.
Let's hope. I have 2 more in the chat box. Let's see. First one, any comment on the large number of individuals who are leaving the parties and becoming undeclared?
The people who are leaving are the ones you want to keep. They're the experienced ones, especially from the foreign policy establishment. There was a letter signed by 360, I think it was, that may not be the exact number, but it was somewhere in that range, foreign policy specialists who are Republicans, who asked Republicans not to vote for Trump. that foreign policy establishment, which sometimes has been responsible for big mistakes, I'll grant you, Iraq war, they will have nothing to do with the Trump side of the party. But once Trump is out, they're going to try to get back in. And you need those people to govern. Those are the people who know, they have the institutional memory. They know the leaders of the world. They have the experience. They have the gravitas. So those are the people you'll want to pull in, and you want to pull them in pretty quickly.
Great. Last one in the chat. How might we deal with the lying and misinformation that seems to have become our new normal?
We've accepted partisan sources of news, and that's made worse by social media, made even worse by Russian intervention. How do we get around it? The media will follow public opinion. People, one question I frequently get is the media biased in favor of, and then you fill in your liberal conservative. And my answer is the media is biased in favor of public opinion. When a president is up, they lay off. George Bush after 9/11, 2 years, they hardly touched him. When a president's down, they gang up on him. George Bush in his last year. It's a herd mentality. It's not ideological. It's a business approach. We want to sell papers. We want to get people to subscribe. We want people to watch our shows. We will give you what we think you want. And yes, there are all kinds of niche outlets, but the major media outlets are very sensitive to you. And so if you stop watching Fox News will cease to be Fox News. We have a lot of power over that. We don't realize it. I always tell my students, you know how much power you have? You're sitting here in the classroom, you could really change things if you wanted to. This year, young people 18 to 24 are voting at the highest rate ever. Now, let's say Biden wins. Those people are going to say, hey, we got you elected. We think climate change is the biggest issue in the world. You better do something about it. And he would. He would because he believes in it, but also because you pave the way for him to do it. You make it politically possible for him to do it. And the same is true with media, and it's true that's, you know, we have an indirect democracy in that sense, but we still have democratic power in that when we feel passionately, the government will follow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. Any other last questions? Remember, you can go ahead and unmute yourselves or in the chat box. Otherwise, we'll go back to Barbara. All right, I think that's it. Barbara, will you wrap us up, please?
Well, Michael, thanks so much. You've unpacked a lot for us to think about and to act on. We really appreciate this time that you shared with us. And I have to decide in a couple of hours if it was trick or treat. But many thanks, Michael. And we leave with hope.
Good, thank you. I appreciate it. Wonderful questions you ask.
Thank you.
Great. And I just would like to remind everybody that next week we will have as our guest Reverend James Lee, who is president of the International Theological Seminary. And he's going to be talking about recent developments in theological education and explore how global partnerships will benefit and enrich all of us. So hope to see you here next week, same time. And Godspeed, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.